Everyone remembers the water turning into wine. Almost nobody remembers that Jesus never touched it. He never stirred it. He never blessed it. He never even leaned over to look inside the jars. Watch the scene closely, the way John wrote it, and you will see something that should stop you cold. The servants do all the work. They filled the stone jars with plain well water right up to the brim because the rabbi told them to, and they had nothing better to do. Then he says 4 words. Draw some out now and carry it. That is it. He does not wave his hand. He does not chant. He does not even stay to watch. And somewhere between the jar and the cup, in the dark, in the carrying, in a space no human eye could see into, the water stops being water. By the time it reaches the lips of the man running the feast, it is wine. Not cheap wine, not passable wine. The best wine anyone at that wedding has tasted all night, so good the head steward pulls the groom aside and basically accuses him of doing the whole thing backwards. You are supposed to serve the good stuff first, while everyone is sober enough to notice. You saved it for last. He has no idea what just happened 3 feet away from him. And that is the first thing you have to understand about the miracles in the Gospel of John. The most important part almost always happens where you cannot see it. In the dark, in the gap, in the part of the story your eyes slide right past. There are 7 of them. 7 miracles. Handpicked by John out of dozens he says Jesus performed. Arranged in an order so deliberate that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. They climb. Each one reaches into a deeper kind of human terror than the one before. They start with a social embarrassment at a party and they end 4 days deep inside a tomb that already smells of death. And the ladder they climb is the ladder of your own fears. Look at the order. First, the fear of shame, of failing in front of everyone you know. Then the fear of losing a child. Then the fear of being stuck, trapped, forgotten. For so long you stop hoping. Then the fear of going without, of not having enough to survive. Then the fear of the chaos you cannot control, the storm that comes for you in the dark. Then the fear of living your whole life shut out, in a darkness no one can fix. And finally, at the top of the ladder, the fear under all the other fears, death itself. John did not pick these at random. He built a staircase straight down into the human heart, and he put a sign on every step. And here's the part nobody tells you. The 7th miracle, the greatest one, the one where a dead man walks out of his own grave, still wrapped in the cloth they buried him in. That miracle is the exact thing that gets Jesus killed. The sign that proves he can give life is the sign that signs his own death warrant. Hold on to that. We are going to walk every step of how it happens, because this is not a list of magic tricks. This is not a highlight reel of a man being impressive. This is not even, at its heart, a collection of separate stories. This is one rising argument, building one floor at a time, toward a single question that John is going to put directly to you before the gospel is over. And you are not going to be allowed to stay neutral. John does not even call them miracles. That is the first clue everyone misses. In Greek, the word he chooses over and over is semeion, a sign, not a wonder to gawk at, a sign like a road sign, a thing that points past itself to somewhere you are supposed to go. The other gospel writers will sometimes use words that mean raw power, displays of might. John almost never does. For John, a miracle that you only stand and applaud is a miracle you have completely missed. The water becoming wine is not the point. The water becoming wine is the finger pointing at something down the road. So let us follow the finger all 7 times. Go back to that wedding because there is more in it than you think. The town is called Cana, a nothing village in the hills of Galilee. The kind of place that does not show up on a Roman map. A wedding in a town like that was not an afternoon. It was a week. 7 days of feasting, of relatives sleeping on every floor, of a poor family spending money they did not have to honor a son and a bride. And in the middle of it, the unthinkable happens. The wine runs out. You have to understand what that meant. This was not a catering hiccup. In that culture, running out of wine at your own wedding was a public humiliation that could follow a family for years. The host had failed his guests. The shame was real and it was going to last. Somewhere in the back of that house, a family is realizing their whole celebration is about to collapse into embarrassment in front of everyone they know. And one woman notices before anyone else does. Her name is Mary. She is the mother of the rabbi who happens to be there as a guest, and she does something that tells you she already knows exactly who her son is. She does not announce a crisis. She does not make a speech. She walks over to him and says 5 quiet words. They have no wine. That is the entire request. No instructions, no demand. Just a mother who has carried a secret for 30 years, laying a problem at the feet of the one person she believes can do something about it. He tells her his hour has not yet come. And then, and you can feel her ignoring this completely, she turns to the servants and says, the most important sentence any human being can say about Jesus. Do whatever he tells you. That is it. That is the whole instruction. Do whatever he tells you. So they fill the jars, 6 stone jars, the big ceremonial kind used for ritual washing, each one holding 20 or 30 gallons. Do the math and you're looking at something like 150 gallons of water, and it all becomes wine. A poor family in a forgotten village suddenly has more good wine than a king would serve, and almost nobody in that house ever finds out where it came from. John gives us the line that becomes the spine of everything that follows. This, he writes, was the first of his signs, and it revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The first of his signs, which tells you the very first time that he is counting. He wants you counting too. Stay with me, because the second sign answers a fear that cuts 1,000 times deeper than a ruined party. A man is walking. He is not strolling. He is covering more than 20 miles of hard hill country on foot. And he is doing it because his son is dying. John calls him a royal official, a man attached to the household of Herod, which means this is a man with status, with servants of his own, with money and rank, and the kind of pull most people only dream of. And none of it is worth anything right now, because there is a small body burning with fever in a bed in Capernaum, and there is nothing that all his power can do about it. You may know exactly where this man is. You may have sat in that chair, the chair beside a bed that holds someone you would trade your own life for, while every doctor and every dollar runs out at the same time, and the only thing left to do is the thing you swore you would never do. Beg. So he begs. He finds the rabbi and he asks him to come down and heal his boy before he dies. And Jesus says something that sounds almost cold. Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe. But the father is past arguing about theology. He has one card left and he plays it with everything he has. Sir, come down before my child dies. And here John does it again. He shows you the miracle happening in the gap, in the place you cannot see. Jesus does not go with him. Jesus says 7 words, go. Your son will live. And the father, itasas, and this is the moment that should undo you. The father turns around and walks home on nothing, on a sentence. He has no proof. He has no glowing light, no thunder, no sign he can hold in his hand. He has 7 words from a man he just met, and he stakes the life of his child on them. And he starts the 20-mile walk back in the dark. His servants meet him on the road the next day. The fever broke, they tell him, and he asks the one question a desperate father would ask. When? What time? And they tell him the hour, and he goes cold all over, because it was the exact hour, the exact moment that the rabbi 20 miles away had said the words. The boy was healed before his father ever made it home. Healed at a distance. Healed by a sentence flung across 20 miles of hills. John tells you this was the second sign. He is still counting. And notice the climb. The first sign rescued a family from embarrassment. The second sign rescued a child from the grave. The stakes are rising exactly the way John planned them to. Here is what most people miss about the third sign. It is the one where everything turns dark. There is a pool in Jerusalem with 5 covered walkways around it near the sheep gate. John even gives you the name. Bethesda. For centuries, skeptics pointed at this detail and said John made it up. A pool with 5 porticos. 5? Pools are not built like that. John, they said, didn't know Jerusalem, probably wrote his gospel 100 years later in some faraway city, and invented the local color. Then the archaeologists came. In the 1800s and again in the 20th century, they dug near the church of St. Anne in Jerusalem, and they found it. A pool. 2 basins separated by a center walkway, ringed by porticos. 5 of them, exactly 5. Exactly where John said, exactly the shape John described, buried under 19 centuries of rubble. The man who wrote this gospel had stood at the edge of that water, and around that water, in John's day, lay a crowd of the broken, the blind, the lame, the withered. People who believed that when the water stirred, the first one in would be healed, which meant the sickest and slowest never had a chance. And among them, one man. He has been an invalid for 38 years. Sit with that number. 38 years. Longer than many people in the ancient world lived at all. This man has spent almost 4 decades lying on a mat beside a pool he cannot reach in time, watching other people get well, slowly becoming part of the furniture of his own suffering. Jesus looks at him and asks a question that sounds almost cruel until you understand it. Do you want to get well? It is not a cruel question. It is a surgical one. Because after 38 years, a man can stop wanting. A man can build his whole identity out of the mat he lies on. The question goes straight to the place where hope died a long time ago. And the man does not even answer it. He just explains why it has never worked. I have no one to put me in the water. While I'm trying, someone else always goes down first. And Jesus does not put him in the water. He never touches the water at all. He just says 3 words: get up, walk. And 38 years of paralysis end in a single sentence. But here is where the whole gospel turns, because it was the Sabbath. And the man carrying his mat through the streets in pure joy gets stopped by the religious leaders who are not interested in the miracle at all. They are interested in the fact that he is carrying something on a holy day. And when they trace it back to Jesus, John writes a sentence that changes the temperature of everything that comes after. For this reason, they began to persecute him and to seek to kill him. There it is, the 3rd sign. The healing of a man who waited almost 40 years for help. And the first time anyone writes down that they want Jesus dead. From this point on, every miracle happens under a shadow. Every sign Jesus gives now is also a step closer to a cross. He knows it. And he keeps doing them anyway. Pay attention to that, because it is going to matter enormously by the end. Quick pause, because I need to ask you something before we go deeper. If these signs are landing, if you're starting to see the order, the climb, the way John built this on purpose, do me one favor. Subscribe and turn the bell on. There are more of these coming. Every story in the Bible walked through the way it was meant to be heard, and drop a comment telling me which sign has hit you hardest so far. I read them. Now, back to the water, because the 4th sign is the only one all 4 gospel writers agreed they could not leave out. A crowd is forming on a hillside above the Sea of Galilee, and it will not stop growing. By the time it settles, there are 5,000 men, which means with women and children, there are probably 15 or 20,000 people on that grass. They came because of the signs. They watched him heal the sick, and they followed him out into the middle of nowhere. And now it is getting late, and there is no food, and they are hours from any town. Jesus turns to one of his disciples, a man named Philip, and asks him where they could possibly buy bread for all these people. John tells you why he asked. He asked to test him because he already knew what he was going to do. The whole thing is staged on purpose as a sign you are meant to read. And Philip fails the test the way you and I would fail it. He does the math out loud. 8 months of wages would not buy enough bread for each person to get a bite. In other words, it cannot be done. The numbers say no. And then a second disciple speaks up, Andrew. And Andrew has found something, though he clearly feels ridiculous mentioning it. There's a boy here, he says, with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. And then Andrew says the saddest, most human line in the whole scene. But what are they among so many? 5 loaves, 2 fish, 1 boy, 20,000 stomachs. You know the math. The math is hopeless. And that is precisely the point, because John wants you to feel how impossible it is before it happens. Jesus takes the boy's lunch. He gives thanks. And he starts breaking the bread. And it doesn't run out. It keeps coming and coming, basket after basket, passing through the crowd, until John tells you they were filled. Not fed, filled, as much as they wanted. And when it is over, the leftovers fill 12 baskets, more food at the end than they started with at the beginning. A child's lunch fed a city. And here's what most people miss. Watch where the miracle happens again. Nobody sees the moment the bread multiplies. It happens in his hands, in the breaking, in the giving away. The bread does not multiply in the basket. It multiplies in the act of being handed to someone hungry, in the dark, in the gap, right where you cannot see it, just like the wine. But it gets stranger because of what the crowd tried to do right after they ate. John tells you that the moment those thousands of people realized what had happened, they decided they wanted to take him by force and make him king. A man who can make bread out of nothing is a man who can feed an army, fund a rebellion, end Roman rule. They did not want a savior. They wanted a meal ticket with a crown. And Jesus, John says, slipped away from them up the mountain alone. He refused the throne they offered because it was the wrong throne. And that same night, the fifth sign happens with no crowd at all, no audience, no one trying to crown him, just 12 terrified men and the dark. Bon. The disciples got in a boat to cross the sea, while Jesus stayed behind. And now they are 3 or 4 miles out in the middle of the night, and a storm has come down on them the way storms come down on that lake, fast and violent and out of nowhere. The wind is against them, the waves are climbing. These are fishermen, some of them, men who know this water, and they are afraid. You need to understand what the sea meant to an ancient person. The sea was not a vacation. The sea was chaos. It was the realm of death and monsters and everything that swallows you and never gives you back. In the Hebrew imagination, the deep water was the enemy, the thing only God himself could tread down and master. So when these men are out in the black water in a storm, they are not just in physical danger. They are in the grip of the oldest fear there is. And then they see something walking toward them on the water. Put yourself in that boat. You are exhausted, soaked, certain you might die. And now a figure is coming across the surface of the chaos itself, doing the one thing the sea is supposed to make impossible. John says they were terrified. Of course they were. And the figure speaks, and what he says is the key that unlocks the entire gospel, and almost every English Bible flattens it. In most translations, he says, "It is I. Do not be afraid." But that is not quite what the Greek says. The Greek is ego eimi, I am. The exact phrase, the precise words that God spoke to Moses out of the burning bush when Moses asked his name. I am. The name above all names, walking across the water that only God can master in the middle of the night, toward men who thought they were about to drown. He is not just calming them down. He is telling them who he is. The chaos is under his feet. The thing you are most afraid of is the thing he is standing on. And the moment they take him into the boat, John says, immediately the boat reached the shore they were heading for. The terror and the distance both collapse the instant he steps aboard. 5 signs down. A party. A dying child. 38 years of paralysis. A hillside of hunger. And the chaos of the deep. And he is still counting. There are 2 left. And the 6th one is going to put a man on trial for the crime of being able to see. Okay. There is a man in Jerusalem who has been blind since the day he was born. He has never seen his mother's face. He has never seen color. He has spent his entire life as a beggar in the dark. And worse than the darkness is what everyone assumes about it. Because in that world, a birth defect like his meant somebody had sinned. The disciples actually ask it out loud, right in front of him. Who sinned, this man or his parents that he was born blind. Imagine living your whole life as other people's theology problem, and Jesus rejects the entire premise. Neither, he says. This happened so that the works of God could be put on display in him. And then he does something strange and earthy and almost crude. He spits on the ground. He makes mud with the saliva. He smears it on the blind man's eyes with his fingers. And he tells him to go and wash in a particular pool. The pool is called Siloam. And John, who never wastes a detail, stops the action to translate the name for you. Siloam, he says, means sent. The blind man is sent to the pool called Sent by the one the whole gospel keeps calling the Sent One. Nothing in John is an accident. Even the plumbing is preaching. By the way, and the pool is real too. For a long time, people thought they knew where it was, a small Byzantine-era basin. Then in 2004, workers repairing a sewer line in Jerusalem hit ancient stone steps, and the archaeologists came, and they uncovered the actual pool of Siloam from the time of Jesus, a massive public pool, exactly the kind of place a crowd of beggars would gather. The ground keeps confirming the story. The man washes, and he comes back seeing. And now watch what happens next, because the miracle is over in one verse, and the rest of the chapter is a courtroom. The neighbors do not believe it is the same man. They drag him to the Pharisees. The Pharisees interrogate him because, again, it was the Sabbath. They call his parents, who are so afraid of being thrown out of the synagogue that they refuse to answer and throw their own son under the wheels. Ask him, they say. He is old enough. He can speak for himself. So this man who could not see a few hours ago is left alone to defend his own healing against the most powerful religious men in the city. And what he says is one of the bravest, funniest, most human lines in the whole Bible. They keep pressing him about who Jesus is, demanding he denounce the man as a sinner. And finally he just says, I do not know about any of that. One thing I know. I was blind, and now I see. He will not be argued out of his own eyes. They throw him out. They excommunicate a man for the crime of being healed. And Jesus goes and finds him the way he always finds the ones who get thrown out. And the man who couldn't see is the one who ends up truly seeing, while the men with perfect vision are the ones John says are blind. And Jesus says the line that turns the whole sign inside out. I came into this world, he says, so that the blind would see, and those who think they see would go blind. The Pharisees standing there hear it and bristle. Are we blind too? And his answer is the most chilling sentence in the chapter. If you were blind, he tells them, you would have no guilt. But because you say, we see, your guilt remains. Here is the terror buried in the sixth sign. The man born blind admitted he could not see, and he was healed. The men certain they could see refused to admit there was anything wrong with them, and they stayed in the dark forever. The most dangerous blindness in the gospel is not the kind you are born with. It is the kind you insist you do not have. 6 signs, and every one has climbed higher than the last. We've gone from wine to a fevered child to 38 years, to a starving multitude, to the chaos of the sea, to a man born in the dark. There is one sign left, and it is the one that breaks the ceiling entirely. Because the 7th sign is not about sickness or hunger or fear. It is about death, and it is going to cost Jesus everything. One more thing before we walk into that tomb. because I do not want you to miss it. If you have made it this far, you already understand this gospel better than most people ever will. So help one more person find it. Share this video with someone who needs it. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Because what comes next is the hinge the whole story turns on. All right? Bethany, the seventh sign. There is a village called Bethany, less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and in it live 2 sisters and their brother, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Jesus loves this family. John says it plainly, which he rarely does. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. This is not a stranger. This is a friend, and the friend is sick. The sisters send word. Lord, the one you love is sick. It is a message with a question buried inside it, and the question is the oldest one in the human heart. If you love him, why are you not here? And Jesus does something that has confused and wounded people for 2,000 years. He stays where he is for 2 more days on purpose. He waits until he knows Lazarus is dead, and only then does he go. When he finally arrives, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. That number matters more than you know. There was a belief in that time that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days, hoping to return. By the 4th day, hope was gone. The body had begun to corrupt. 4 days dead was not mostly dead. 4 days dead was dead beyond any rumor of recovery. John makes sure you know the count, because he wants every possible exit sealed before the sign begins. Martha comes out to meet him first, and she says the thing both sisters are thinking: Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It is faith and grief and accusation, all in one sentence. And Jesus tells her that her brother will rise again. And she says, yes, she knows at the resurrection on the last day, someday, in the far-off future. And Jesus looks at her and says, the line the entire gospel has been climbing toward from the very first jar of water at Cana. I am the resurrection and the life. There it is again. I am Ego Amy. The same name from the burning bush. The same name from the water in the storm. He does not say, I bring the resurrection. He does not say, I know about the resurrection. He says, I am it. The thing you are hoping for someday is standing in front of you with dirt on his sandals. Then Mary comes, and she falls at his feet weeping, and the people with her are weeping, and John gives us 2 of the most important words in the Bible. Jesus wept. Stop there for a second. The man who is about to raise this body from the dead, who knows, with total certainty, that in about 10 minutes, Lazarus is going to walk out of that grave. That man stands at the tomb of his friend and cries. He is not crying because the situation is hopeless. He knows the ending. He cries anyway, because death is an obscenity, because his friend is in there, because the sisters he loves are in agony. The shortest verse in the Bible is also one of the deepest, and it tells you that God does not stand at your grave unmoved. He weeps before he works. And then he stops weeping, and he walks to the tomb, and he tells them to roll the stone away. And Martha, practical, grieving Martha, panics. Lord, by now there is a smell. He's been there 4 days. She is saying out loud what everyone is thinking: you are too late. There is nothing in there now but decay. And Jesus says, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? They roll back the stone, and he prays out loud, and then he raises his voice, and he calls into the darkness of that tomb with 3 words, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man hears him. You have to understand what is happening in that silence after he calls. Everyone is staring into a black hole in a hillside that holds a 4-day-old corpse. And then there is a sound, a shuffle, a scrape, and a figure appears in the mouth of the tomb, wrapped head to foot in burial cloths, hands bound, face covered, hopping forward, because he cannot even walk properly through the wrappings. A dead man standing in the daylight, still dressed for his own funeral. And Jesus says, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." That is the 7th sign, the greatest one. The ceiling broken, a man 4 days dead, walking out of his own grave because a voice called his name. And now the open loop closes, and it closes like a trap, because right after this, John tells you something that turns your stomach. Many who saw it believed, but some went and told the authorities, and the leaders held a council, and they said, "This man is doing too many signs. If we let him go on, everyone will believe in him." And from that day on, John writes, they plotted to kill him. Do you see it now? The sign that raised a dead man to life is the exact sign that gets the life giver killed. Proving he had power over death is the thing that sent him to a cross. They watched a man walk out of a grave, and their response was to dig one for the man who opened it. The greatest act of life in the gospel triggers the greatest act of death. He gave Lazarus back his life, knowing it would cost him his own. He knew. He did it anyway. You have stood at a sealed grave. Maybe not a cave in Bethany, but a polished casket lowered on straps. A stone with a name and 2 dates, and a dash in between that is supposed to hold an entire life. You have felt the specific, crushing finality of it, the way the world expects you to simply accept that the door does not open again, that the conversation is over, that there are things you will now never get to say. Every human being who's ever lived has stood at that door and found it locked from the other side. And John has spent 7 signs, 11 chapters, and his entire heart building to one claim. There is a voice that the door obeys. There is a name that death cannot keep its grip on. The same voice that turned water to wine in the dark, that healed a boy from 20 miles away, that lifted a man off a mat after 38 years, that fed a hillside and walked on the chaos and opened eyes that had never seen. That voice stood in front of a tomb, and the tomb gave its dead man back. But Lazarus, understand, was only a sign, a finger pointing down the road, because Lazarus walked out of that grave still wrapped in cloth, still needing the wrappings taken off, still a man who would one day die again. He was a preview. He was not the point. The point comes a few weeks later, and it does not look like a miracle at all. It looks like a defeat. They arrest him in a garden at night, exactly the way the council planned over the body of Lazarus. They put him through the kind of trial that is not a trial. They flog him until the skin is gone. They drive iron through his wrists and his feet, and they lift him up on a Roman cross between 2 criminals in the most public, most humiliating way the empire knew how to kill a man. And the crowds that ate his bread and watched him walk on water are not there now. Almost no one is. A few women. One disciple, his mother, who once stood at a wedding in Cana and said, "Do whatever he tells you. now standing at the foot of a cross, watching her son die. And here's the strangest thing of all. Of everything in this gospel, this is the one moment John wants you to read as the opposite of a tragedy. Because at the very end, just before he dies, Jesus says one word. In Greek, it is tetelestai. Most Bibles translate it, it is finished. But that is not quite it. Tetelestai was a word they stamped on a bill that had been paid in full. It was the word a servant said when a task was completed exactly as the master ordered. It is not the gasp of a man giving up. It is the shout of a man who has finished what he came to do. Not it is over, paid, in full, done, and then they bury him. They wrap him in cloth, the way they wrapped Lazarus. They seal him in the rock. And every enemy he ever had goes home that night, believing they have finally won. And on the third morning, the women come in the dark to grieve. And the stone is already rolled back. And the tomb is empty. And the burial cloths are lying there folded with no body in them, because this time nobody had to call him out. This time he did not come out wrapped, needing to be unbound. He left the grave clothes behind like a snake leaves a shed skin, and he walked out under his own power into a morning where death does not get the last word ever again. That is the eighth sign, the one all seven were pointing at the whole time. And you do not have to take only the gospel's word that something happened. Within about 80 years of that morning, a Roman governor named Pliny the Younger sat down and wrote a worried letter to the Emperor Trajan, trying to figure out what to do about a movement he could not stamp out. He describes these people meeting before dawn and singing to Christ as to a god. A Roman official, no friend of the faith, documenting that across the empire, ordinary people were worshiping an executed Galilean carpenter as God himself. Something happened at that tomb that turned terrified men who ran away in a garden into people who would rather die than stop saying his name. And many of them did. But John does not end his gospel at the empty tomb. And the very last scene he chooses to write down is, of all things, one more sign. A quieter one. And he saves it for the one man who needed it most. His name is Peter, and Peter is broken. Remember, on the night they arrested Jesus, Peter swore he would die before he denied him. And then before the sun came up, he denied even knowing the man. 3 times. To a servant girl, he cursed, and he swore he had never met him. And then a rooster crowed, and Peter went out and wept like his whole life had collapsed. Because it had. So now, even after the empty tomb, even after he has seen the risen Jesus, Peter does the thing a man does when he does not know who he is anymore. He goes back to the only thing he knew before all of this. I am going fishing, he says, and a few of the others go with him, and they fish all night on the same Sea of Galilee where they once watched a man walk across the chaos, and they catch nothing, not one fish. The whole night, empty nets and empty hands, and the silence between men who do not know what to say. Then at dawn, there is a figure on the shore. They cannot tell who it is yet, and the figure calls out across the water and asks if they have caught anything, and they have to admit it. No, nothing. And the stranger tells them to throw the net on the other side of the boat, which is almost insulting advice to give professional fishermen. But something in them obeys, the way the servants at Cana obeyed, the way the Father walked home on 7 words. They throw the net, and it fills so fast and so full they cannot even haul it in. 153 fish, John says, counting them the way he counts everything, and the net does not even tear. And it is in that exact moment, with the net groaning full, that one of the disciples gets it. It is the Lord, he says, because they have seen this before. They know this signature, the impossible abundance arriving. The second they did what he said, and Peter, impulsive, heartbroken Peter, smart, does not wait for the boat. He throws himself into the water and swims for shore because he cannot get to Jesus fast enough. And on the beach there is a charcoal fire already burning with fish and bread on it. And you have to understand why John mentions the charcoal fire, because John never wastes a word. The last time Peter stood next to a charcoal fire, he was warming his hands in a courtyard, denying he ever knew Jesus. Jesus builds him the same fire. On purpose. He is going to walk Peter back through the worst night of his life and heal it. 3 times Peter denied him. So 3 times, over breakfast, Jesus asks him one question. Do you love me? 3 times Peter says yes. And 3 times Jesus gives him back the job he thought he had thrown away forever. Feed my sheep. He does not lecture him. He does not make him grovel. He takes the man's 3-fold failure and covers it, fold for fold, with a 3-fold restoration. That is the sign John chooses to end on. Not thunder, not an army. A breakfast on a beach for a man who failed. Because here is what most people miss about every sign in this gospel all the way down. They were never really about power. They were about the kind of God who walks 20 miles toward a dying child, who weeps at a tomb he is about to open, who builds a fire on a beach for the friend who betrayed him. The signs point at his power, but his power was always pointing at his heart. So why did John write all this down? He does not make you guess. At the end, he stops the story and tells you directly in a sentence most people read right past. He says Jesus did many other signs that are not written in this book. But these, he says, these 7, these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That is the whole reason. Every sign was a finger pointing at you. And so we land on 3 things to carry out of here. The first is this. The miracles in John were never about the miracles. They were signs, semeion, pointers. The wine, the bread, the healed eyes. None of it was the destination. Every single one was an arrow aimed at a person, saying, look who is standing in front of you. If you stop at the wonder and miss the one performing it, you have done exactly what the steward at the wedding did. You have tasted the miracle and never once asked where it came from. The second is this. Notice where God does his deepest work. In the dark, in the gap, in the carrying, the breaking, the place your eyes cannot follow. The water didn't change in the jar where everyone could watch. It changed on the way to the cup. The bread did not multiply in the basket. It multiplied in the giving. And maybe that is the most honest thing this gospel has to say to you about your own life, about the part of your story that feels like nothing is happening, like you are just carrying water nobody asked for. The miracle in John almost never happens where the crowd is looking. It happens in the dark, in the obedience, in the gap, Do whatever he tells you, Mary said. The servants never saw the moment it changed either. They just carried what they were told to carry. And somewhere in the carrying, it became something else. And the third is the one I cannot soften, and I would not if I could. There is a tomb in your future. You already know it. There is a door that, for everyone you have ever loved, and for you, closes from the other side. In the entire Gospel of John, all 7 signs, the wine and the fever and the 38 years, and the hunger and the storm and the blindness, every one of them was John clearing the ground, sealing the exits, removing every excuse so that he could stand you in front of one tomb in Bethany and one empty tomb in a garden and make you hear 3 words spoken into the dark. He is the resurrection. He is the life. And the door, your door, the one you thought was locked forever, he says it opens. He says it opens because he walked out of his own. So let me ask you straight and tell me below, because I read every one of these, of all 7 signs, the wine, the official son, the man at Bethesda, the 5,000, the water he walked on, the man born blind, and Lazarus. Which one reached into your life and grabbed you? Which one is your sign? Tell me which, and tell me why. Everyone remembers the water turning into wine, but the miracle was never the wine. The miracle was that he was telling you, from the very first sign to the empty tomb, exactly who he is. And he is still, right now, in the dark, and the gap, and the place you cannot see, asking you the only question that ever mattered. Do you want to get well? He is still counting. And he left room in the story for one more name, yours.